In the forgotten annals of history, where empires turn to dust and crowns become relics of sorrow, there lies the tale of the Ardine dynasty. It is not a story of glory, but one whispered in the chilling drafts that sweep through the skeletal remains of its grand palace. At the heart of this ruin, behind walls of cold, unforgiving stone, is a place that has no name on any map. The courtiers called it the Palace of Death, but its true horror was known by another name, the Sealed Chamber. This was not a treasury or a royal bedroom. It was a tomb built for the living. It was a place where light, sound, and hope were sentenced to die. Within its impenetrable silence, the final, desperate breaths of a queen and her princess were swallowed by the darkness. This is the story of how a kingdom built on ambition became a graveyard of secrets, and how a family chosen by fate was ultimately devoured by it. It is a testament to the fact that the most magnificent walls often hide the most unspeakable cruelties, and that history remembers not just the victors, but the silent screams of the vanquished. King Thuron was not born to wear a crown. He was forged in the crucible of border wars and political turmoil, a man whose ambition was as sharp and as cold as the steel of his sword. He hailed from a minor noble house, a forgotten branch of a withered family tree, but he possessed an iron will that bent others to his command. Thuron carved his path to the throne not with diplomacy, but with blood and fear. He saw the world as a chaotic battlefield, and he believed that only an unwavering, absolute ruler could bring order. His ascent was a brutal spectacle. Rivals were eliminated in the dead of night. Alliances were broken as swiftly as they were made, and entire families who stood in his way were erased from the ledgers of history. When he finally seized the capital and placed the heavy, cold crown upon his own head, the people did not cheer. They fell silent, for they knew they were not witnessing the dawn of a golden age, but the rise of a master who saw his kingdom not as a home to nurture, but as a treasure to possess and a fortress to command. His heart was a throne room of one, and his reign began as it would end, in shadow. To legitimize his blood-soaked claim, King Thuron needed a queen of pristine lineage. He found her in Lyra, a princess from a neighboring kingdom renowned for her grace, wisdom, and ethereal beauty. Their marriage was a transaction, a sealing of a fragile peace, but when Queen Lyra arrived, she brought with her a light that the king's dark court had never known. She was the antithesis of her husband, gentle where he was harsh, compassionate where he was cold. The people, so accustomed to living in fear of their new king, found themselves drawn to her warmth. She moved through the stone halls of the palace like a whispered song, her presence a balm on the kingdom's festering wounds. For a brief time, it seemed as though her goodness might temper the king's brutal nature. He was captivated by her, not with love but with the pride of possession. She was his most prized jewel, proof that even a man like him could command beauty and grace. But Lyra soon learned that her new home was a gilded cage. She was a queen in title but a prisoner in truth, her every move watched, her every word weighed, a beautiful dove trapped in a den of wolves. A year into their cold and silent marriage, the palace bells rang with a joy that felt almost genuine. Queen Lyra had given birth to a daughter, the Princess Seraphina. She was a perfect, fragile creature, a flicker of innocence in a world of creeping shadows. For the kingdom, her birth was a symbol of hope, a promise of continuity, a sign that the new dynasty might yet find its heart. King Thuron, for the first time, displayed something akin to paternal love. He saw in Seraphina not a daughter, but the vessel of his legacy, the continuation of his name, the pure bloodline that would cement his rule for centuries to come. He would stand over her cradle for hours, his dark eyes fixated on the infant, his mind already charting the powerful alliances her future marriage would bring. For Queen Lyra, however, the princess was something more. She was a reason to endure. In Seraphina's innocent eyes, the queen found the only genuine light in the entire palace. She held her daughter close, whispering promises of protection, trying desperately to shield this small, perfect life from the cold ambition of her father and the suffocating darkness of the throne she was born to inherit. The fragile peace brought by the princess's birth did not last. As King Thuron's power grew, so did his paranoia. The palace, once a center of governance, transformed into a web of spies and whispers. Every shadow seemed to hold a conspirator. Every rustle of silk in the hallways sounded like a plot being woven. The king trusted no one, not his generals, not his council, and least of all the courtiers who admired his beautiful queen. He saw their respect for Lyra as a threat, a silent judgment on his own rule. Envy, a poison that had long festered in the court, began to spread. Nobles who had been displaced by Thuron's rise now saw the queen as a figurehead for their discontent. They whispered venomous lies in the king's ear, fueling his insecurities, suggesting that the queen's gentle nature was a mask for cunning deception. The air in the palace grew thick with suspicion. Friend turned against friend, and loyalty became a currency traded for survival. Queen Lyra felt the change most acutely. The smiles of her ladies-in-waiting became strained, and the guards posted outside her chambers watched her not with deference, but with cold, assessing eyes. The palace was no longer a home. It was a breathing monster of stone and secrets, and its shadows were beginning to close in. King Thuron's ambition evolved from a desire for power into a ravenous hunger for absolute control. He was no longer content with ruling a kingdom. He wanted to command its very soul, to be remembered not as a king, but as a god. He poured the kingdom's wealth into colossal statues of himself, monuments designed to cast long shadows over the starving populace. He waged senseless wars on distant lands, not for territory but for glory, sending thousands of his subjects to die for his vanity. His obsession with his legacy became absolute. He saw his daughter, Princess Seraphina, not as a child, but as the ultimate instrument of his dynastic immortality. He began to control every aspect of her life, dictating her studies, her friendships, and her future. He grew colder, more distant, ruling from a throne of isolation. His council meetings were no longer discussions, but monologues of his own grandeur. Anyone who dared to offer a dissenting opinion was accused of treason and dragged away in chains. The kingdom was bleeding, its people were suffering, but King Thuron was blind to it all. He was building his legacy on a foundation of bones, convinced that history would forgive his cruelty in exchange for the sheer scale of his power. While the king built his monuments of stone, Queen Lyra built walls of silence around her heart. She was a spectator to her husband's descent into tyranny, a powerless witness to the suffering he inflicted upon their people. The warmth that had once defined her was extinguished, replaced by a quiet, pervasive sorrow. She spent her days in the royal gardens, the only place where the palace's suffocating atmosphere seemed to thin, but even there she found no peace. Her ladies-in-waiting spoke to her in hushed, fearful tones, their conversations empty of substance, for they knew the king's spies were everywhere. The queen's greatest pain, however, was for her daughter. She saw how King Thuron's possessive ambition was shaping Princess Seraphina, turning her from a carefree child into a silent, obedient doll. Lyra tried to instill kindness and empathy in her daughter in secret, reading her tales of honor and compassion, a desperate act of rebellion against the king's world of cruelty. She wept alone in her chambers, her tears unseen, her anguish unheard. Her life had become a performance of serene obedience, a mask she wore to protect her child, all while carrying a terrible secret, a secret she knew could destroy them all if it ever came to light. Princess Seraphina grew up in a world of beautiful contradictions. She was adorned in the finest silks, yet she felt the constant chill of the palace stone. She was surrounded by tutors and servants, yet she was profoundly alone. Her destiny was a gilded cage from which there was no escape. From a young age, she was taught that she was not a person but a symbol, the future of the Ardyn dynasty. Her father, King Thuron, viewed her as his most valuable asset, a pawn to be used in the great Game of Thrones. He paraded her before visiting dignitaries, her innocent smile a testament to the strength and stability of his reign. Her mother, Queen Lyra, saw her as a fragile flame that needed to be shielded from the coming storm. The princess was caught in the crosscurrents of their silent war. She learned to be silent, to observe, to wear a placid expression that betrayed no emotion. She knew her father's love was conditional, tied to her obedience and her future use. She sensed her mother's fear, a constant, humming tension that filled every room they shared. Innocence was a luxury she could not afford, and as she blossomed into a young woman, she understood that her life was not her own. Her fate was already written, a tragic verse in her father's epic of power. The secret Queen Lyra guarded was a truth so devastating it could shatter the very foundations of the throne. Years ago, in the early days of her lonely, loveless marriage, faced with the king's cold indifference and the immense pressure to produce a male heir he desperately craved, the queen had found a moment of solace in the arms of another. It was a single, desperate act of emotional survival with a man who showed her a kindness she had never known, a high-born knight of her personal guard who was quietly executed for a fabricated crime months later. From this fleeting, forbidden union, Princess Seraphina was conceived. The king's obsession, his entire legacy, the pure bloodline he worshipped, was a lie. This was the secret Lyra carried every day, a silent poison in her veins. And as secrets in a palace of whispers always do, it found its way out. A bitter, disgraced lady-in-waiting, seeking revenge on the queen, delivered the venomous truth to King Thuron. She presented him with a hidden locket, a forgotten token from the night, undeniable proof of the queen's betrayal. The king's world did not just crumble, it exploded in a firestorm of incandescent rage. The revelation of the queen's betrayal shattered the last vestiges of King Thuron's sanity. His private agony became a public spectacle of terror. He accused the queen of high treason and witchcraft, his voice thundering through the great hall as he condemned her without trial. This act of public cruelty was the final spark that ignited the smoldering embers of rebellion into a raging inferno. The nobles, weary of his tyranny, and the common people who had always loved the gentle Queen Lyra rose up as one. The kingdom fractured overnight. Banners of rebellion were raised across the provinces, and a civil war, swift and brutal, engulfed the land. The capital city became a slaughterhouse. The king's loyalists fought against the rebel factions in the streets, and the cobblestones ran slick with blood. The grand palace, once a symbol of Thuron's absolute power, became his fortress and his prison. The rebellion was not just a fight for political power. It was a crusade against a mad king, a desperate attempt to purge the land of the darkness he had unleashed. The fall of the throne was as bloody and chaotic as its rise, a symphony of clashing steel and dying screams. As the sounds of battle raged outside the palace walls, King Thuron enacted his final, most monstrous revenge. He did not grant Queen Lyra the mercy of a swift execution. Death was a kindness he was no longer capable of. Instead, he dragged her through the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, down into the deepest, most forgotten foundations, to a place from which no sound could escape, the sealed chamber. It was a relic of a more barbaric age, a room of solid stone with a single, massive iron door that could only be locked from the outside. With the rebellion at his gates and his legacy in ashes, he found his retribution in silence. The queen, bruised and broken, begged him, not for her life, but for the life of her daughter. Her pleas were met with a cold, dead stare. He shoved her into the suffocating, pitch-black void. The last thing she ever saw was the sliver of torchlight disappearing as the heavy door boomed shut. The last thing she ever heard was the grinding of the great iron bolts being driven into place. In the absolute, crushing silence, Queen Lyra was left to face a slow, agonizing end, buried alive in the heart of the palace, her final breaths a secret kept by the stone. With the queen entombed, King Thuron's madness was complete. He was no longer a king defending his throne, but a cornered beast, lashing out in a final, bloody frenzy. The rebels finally breached the palace gates, their cries for justice echoing through the now desecrated halls. They found the king not in his war room, but on his throne, surrounded by the opulence he had bled his kingdom dry to acquire. He was laughing, a hollow, broken sound that chilled the very souls of the soldiers who stormed the room. He did not beg for his life or ask for terms of surrender. He fought. With the last of his royal guards falling around him, He wielded his sword with the desperate strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. But his end was not noble. He was disarmed, dragged from his throne, and pulled down by the hands of the very people he had oppressed. His death was not a clean execution by a rival noble's blade, but a brutal, ignominious end on the cold marble floor of his own throne room. His crown rolled away, clattering into the shadows, a meaningless trinket in a palace of death. Narrator, in the chaos of the king's downfall, a single, horrifying question remained. Where was Princess Seraphina? The rebels searched the palace, hoping to find the innocent girl and install her as a figurehead for a new era of peace. But she was gone. The victorious lord searched every room, every tower, every cellar, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. Her fate, however, was far more tragic than a simple disappearance. In his final moments of lucidity, before the rebels reached his throne room, King Thuron had committed one last act of unspeakable cruelty. Believing the princess to be the living symbol of his shame, the serpent's spawn, he led the terrified girl down to the same silent, dark corridor where her mother was already dying. He opened the sealed chamber just long enough to cast his own daughter inside, sealing her in the eternal darkness with the body of her mother. Princess Seraphina, the jewel of the kingdom, the symbol of hope, was condemned to the same horrific fate. Her cries were never heard. Her death was a secret that died with the mad king, her small body left to decay in a nameless, forgotten tomb. The Arding dynasty was extinguished in fire and blood. With the king, queen, and princess all gone, the kingdom was left without a leader, a ghost of its former self. The rebellion had won, but their victory was hollow. They had overthrown a tyrant, only to inherit a wasteland of ruins and sorrow. The grand palace was abandoned, deemed a cursed place, its halls left to the wind and the dust. The stories of its final days became twisted legends told around frightened firesides. The tale of the Mad King and his beautiful, tragic queen became a cautionary fable, but the fate of Princess Seraphina was lost to history, relegated to a footnote of mystery. No one ever found the sealed chamber. Its location was forgotten, its purpose erased. The palace stood for centuries as a silent, crumbling monument to ambition, betrayal, and the fragility of life. The silence that fell over the kingdom was deeper than the silence of peace. It was the silence of utter desolation, the silence of a story that has no one left to tell it. The ghosts of a fallen king, a murdered queen, and a lost princess were all that remained, their whispers carried on the wind. The story of the sealed chamber is a chilling reminder that power is a voracious beast, and those who seek to possess it are often the first to be consumed. King Thuron, in his quest for an immortal legacy, achieved only eternal infamy, his name synonymous with madness and cruelty. Queen Lyra, a beacon of light, was swallowed by the darkness she tried to temper, and Princess Seraphina, the innocent child born to unite a kingdom, became its final, most tragic sacrifice. Their story teaches us that the grandest of palaces can be the loneliest of prisons, and the most powerful of crowns can be the heaviest of burdens. The stone walls of the sealed chamber hold more than just the dust of forgotten royalty. They hold a timeless and sorrowful truth. They teach us that history is not always written by the victors. Sometimes it is written in the silence between screams, in the darkness of a sealed room, and in the tragic fate of those who are buried by the very history they were meant to create. Their saga is a permanent scar on the memory of the world. Narrator, history bleeds and its echoes are written in the cries of kings, queens, and lost princesses. This was the Fear Room. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more dark history tales.